you hit *6. And the other thing is, if you are through Teams, it's always good to be muted as well. And for people to hear you, you have to do what my colleague just did. You have to turn on your mic. So for the people at the dais, the Fish and Wildlife Commission, it's very important, if you want people to hear you, you have a microphone in front of you and you have a button in the center. Push it, and when it's red, you are a live mic, and push it again and it will mute itself. So that's the best practice. Some other things in the chat, I put some things in there, other ways you can watch this meeting or listen in if you're having problems, some alternative platforms. So let me just mention that for people on the phone that don't have chat. First of all, the Mat-Su Borough has a Facebook page, and it's going to be sent out live on Facebook. And the website is facebook.com/Mat-Su Borough, one word, or just Google on Facebook, Mat-Su Borough. You can also watch it on YouTube Live, and you just go to YouTube and you search for Matanuska-Susitna Borough, and you should be able to see it live. And Mr. Chair, I think that's all I have. We do have some members of the public here, and I would just ask the members of the public when it's time that you, if you want, when there's an opportunity to testify, that you come up to the podium, and just like the rest of us, there is a mic you got to turn on and speak into it. And then, of course, please always identify yourself, whether you are out there in Cyberland or here in the building, because we don't always know your name. And say it slowly for me, because I'm not a fast typist. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn off my mic, but before I do that, I'm going to start a recording. So I want everyone to understand that we are going to record this. And I think I have it on. Yep. So, Mr. Chair, should I turn it over to Chair Mike Wood? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ted. And thank you, everybody, for being here tonight in person and online. We'll start this December 13th special meeting. It's our end of season summary for both sport and commercial fishing. And I'll start off by doing a roll call. And at the top of the list, we'll start with Mayor DeVries. We actually have in the audience, Mayor Edna DeVries. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Chair Mike Wood. Howard Delo.
Present.
Andy Couch.
Yes.
Larry Engel.
Here.
Tim Hale. Tim, you out there? Okay. Pete Probasco.
I'm here.
Jesse Sumner.
Here.
Kendra Zamzow. Here. And our ex officio, Jim Sykes.
Here.
Ted, staff member Ted, do we have a quorum?
Yes, sir, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll start with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands of the Dene people, and we are grateful to their continued stewardship of the land, fish, and wildlife throughout time immemorial. For approving the agenda, I ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Howard. Is there objection to the motion to approve the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is unanimously approved. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. How about Jim Sykes? Would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Introductions. We'll start with an opening statement here by the commission, and then we'll pass it on to our ADF&G people that are out there. Everybody that's here tonight, both the public and the department, both commercial and sport fish, thank you for once again being open to answering the questions that we submitted to you ahead of time, and for making the time to be here tonight to answer our questions. We'll probably follow up on some of your answers, and also for the public to ask us more specifically, or ask you while you're here, some questions they may have. So that being said, it's hard for me to see who's actually out there from the department. Ted, is there a good way to see who's there? We should have from Comfish. Oh, there's Sam Ivy. You want to start, Sam? And Brian Marston. I can see you guys on the screen. Excellent.
Hey, Mike. Yeah, this is Sam Ivy tuning into you from my office. And thanks for having us here tonight. I'm the area biologist for sport fisheries. Brian Marston is here, the commercial area biologist. I see Tim McKinley's face there, tuning in from home. He's the regional research coordinator. Samantha Oslin is on here. She's my assistant area biologist here for the NCI. And most likely my supervisor, Matt Miller, will tune in. And then we also have Nick Djokovic, who's an area research biologist. He'll be tuning in about 5:30.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. I like how you keep rearranging the fur behind you too.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Keep livening things up. Go ahead, Brian. Good to see you.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I guess I'm hooked in for Comfish. I believe Elisa is also probably listening on the phone. I'm also at my office. I'm the area manager for commercial fisheries. Did you want me to summarize now or?
Probably not really summarize. We read the summaries, and we've just mostly introductions and an opening statement.
Okay.
But we have audience members out here that we're going to introduce and keep moving on. Would other members of the department like to introduce themselves?
I think that's it.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll try to acknowledge all the other ones that are out there as well. All right. In the audience, let me see. And people in the audience, if you'd please introduce yourself. And then people who are online, you can introduce yourselves as well. If you'd like to say something that's just a blanket statement about tonight, please feel free to come to the lectern and speak. It's 3 minutes. But you're also, if there's a question that comes up in the meeting that is just, you just can barely contain yourself, put your hand up and we'll try to get it answered at that moment, okay? So that you don't forget about it, all right? And we don't want you to twitch in your seat the whole time. So that being said, we'll start over here on this side of the room and we'll wrap around the back and we'll end up in the front here. So Carol, you want to say hi? Hi. All right. Couldn't do this without you, buddy. Thank you. Over here. Hello, George. Okay, nice. Thanks for being here. Gary? All right, thanks for being here. Good to see you, Gary. Thanks. Okay. Hi, Mike. Thanks for being here.
And Bill Schultz, you directly work for the borough, advocating on particular groups.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. Like I said, if there's, through the questions as we go through, if there's something you guys would like to ask, feel free to throw your hand up. But keep it under 3 minutes, all right? I don't want to cut you off. Please note, let me see, we've got a lot of VPs out there. He had to remind me of that. Thanks for being here, paying attention to us tonight. Keep moving on here. So, oh, sorry, online introductions. Well, there's a big list of you out there. Okay, thanks, Ted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just going to read either if I see a name or the last 4 digits of a phone number, and When I do that, please introduce yourself, and if you have any comments you'd like to make, that's appropriate time to do so. And so the first one is a number ending with 1095. Please unmute and introduce yourself. One zero nine five. We don't hear anything, so we'll keep moving. Number ending with 0095. 0095. Please introduce yourself.
Name is Dan Suprak.
Okay. And do you have any comment you'd like to make to the commission?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next would be Alex Strong. Mr. Strong, did you have any comment or want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, Alex Strawn, Planning Director. I'm just listening in tonight.
Okay, moving on. Thank you. Scrolling down, I guess, rather than moving on. Would be, I have Representative Kevin McCabe. Do you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. Sorry I had no picture tonight because of the bandwidth at my place, but I'm Kevin McCabe, House Representative, and I'm on the Fisheries Committee. So I'm just here to listen in and to see what the issues are.
Thank you, Representative McCabe. Thank you for being here. Next would be Stephen Braun.
This is Ronald Meadows. I'm just listening. And as you know, we couldn't hear when the audience speaks, so it would be helpful Mike, if you would repeat like who, whatever anybody says.
I'm sorry, Mr. Braun, I did not hear that.
Thanks, Steve. It's Mike Wood. We'll make sure when the audience speaks, they come to the lectern. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And then Trevor Roman.
Yeah, this is Trevor Rollman, Northern District Set Netter, also listening in on behalf of the Northern District Set Netters Association to just gather information and appreciate being able to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Trevor. Was there anyone else on the Teams app or phoning in that did not introduce themselves? I'd like to do so. Please unmute and introduce yourselves now. Okay, then just make sure you are muted out there in Cyberland. And Mr. Chair, that's all I have. I would just say though, best practice for the commission members, remember if you have a red light on your mic, your hot mic, you might want to turn that off unless you are speaking. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ted. I think you move into the staff presentations.
And I do not have any at this time, except that the Fish and Wildlife Commission does meet the third Thursday of every month, except for the summer. And our meetings are open to the public, and we encourage members to either physically be present or members of the public to either call in or through the Teams app. So that's a third Thursday, which means this Thursday at 4 p.m. We'll have a meeting at 4 p.m. down in the lower level conference room, also available remotely. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ted. We'll be discussing fish and wildlife at that meeting. This meeting tonight is only the end of season summary for the 2021 fishing season, sport and commercial. So we're not talking about brown things at this meeting, but you can attend next Thursday if you'd like to hear about brown things. Okay. We'll start with ADF&G commercial fishing and notable highlights and observations. And Brian, this is usually the place where we'd say, go ahead and read your season summary, but we all have that season summary and we've read it. But I want to give you an opportunity, or we as a commission wanted to give you an opportunity to, instead of read it, maybe draw some specific things out of there that were notable to you or comments that you have just regarding this past season.
Okay, yeah, I would basically have the same that we spoke about the last meeting, but to summarize real briefly, the Northern District and Custatan sockeye harvests were up, whereas the Eastside set net was significantly down and everything else was, more or less average or below average. The escapement goals were either exceeded or made for sockeye salmon throughout the Northern District and also all of Upper Cook Inlet. And I guess I'll leave it there, and I'll just answer any questions that come up either for that or with the questions.
Thank you, Brian, and it was a good end of season summary as well. Sam, would you like to chime in and do the same? Basically, we've read the end of season summary, and that's available, but any thoughts or observations or anything you'd like to point out from this season, whether it's species by species or area, or go ahead.
Okay, Mike, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll go through by species. Hold on a second here. Something's popped up on here. I don't know how to get rid of it. Okay, we'll ignore it. We started out our sport seasons with Chinook salmon catch and release. One thing that was notable is that, we started the season with some uncertainty with the forecast of 4-year-old fish because, we've been seeing some pretty low returns of that age class. What we did end up seeing, at least on the Deshka this year, was a notably high return of 5-year-olds fish, which we suspected might be the case. Another notable highlight was that's really the only place that we saw that happen was on the Deshka River. And indeed, 2016 brood year returned a lot. I mean, probably 13,000 5-year-olds to the Deshka this year. We kind of came in at the low end, only about 3,000 4-year-olds this year on Deshka. So that's going to drive our forecast for next year down a little bit because it just will. And then one thing I'd like to say is that when we got into the season for king salmon on the Deshka, it was kind of like the old days a little bit. I mean, they came in on time, and they came in just like a manager would hope. They kind of built up to the midpoint of the run, and then they kind of fell off after the midpoint. We were able to achieve the low end of the goal about halfway through the season and get the Deshka opened up to some harvest. And I think that could have resulted in, 600 to 1,000 fish harvested on Deshka this year. By the 18th, we opened that up. So it was kind of, it was a nice feeling on the Deshka that way. It felt good. Other areas weren't quite as good at fishing this year, like up at Lake Creek, which is kind of so-so. The tail race was okay, but not great. Little Sioux, it took a while for the Kings to move up the river, and we're starting to look into what we think might be a real cold water phenomenon happening there on some years. We did notice when the temperature jumped out of the single digits into some double digits, the fish came, and then the run came through, and we were able to open up the Little Sioux for harvest towards the end of the season after July 2nd. So that's kind of the king season. And then Fish Creek, we were able to open that up for 8 days of dip netting. And I looked at the last 3 average harvests for sockeye at Fish Creek, and we're at around 20,000 a year. And I suspect that the way that fish were really running up the creek when we open it up, we'll have a good harvest for sockeye this year again at Fish Creek. That's a really good thing for the valley when that happens. And then coho salmon, I'll just finish off with coho. Really don't have any complaints. We started the season out kind of light with coho. And I think what happened, and the OTF kind of suggested this, was coho were late to the inlet. And so they didn't show up mid-July like they normally do. They didn't show up until almost August. But once they did, it was pretty steady and pretty decent fishing throughout. It's one of the few years where we actually didn't take action with the EO one way or the other to liberalize or restrict. We just were with regulation for the season. We were able to make the goal kind of near the low end on Little Sioux by the time it was said and done, and we didn't get an actual count on Deshka. We ended up having to pull the weir out early due to budget cuts, and before we felt comfortable making an assessment of run size on the Deshka. So yeah, that's about it, Mike.
All right, Sam, thank you. Was there any member of the commission have a question right off the bat for either Brian or Sam? Go ahead, Howard.
Yeah, this is probably a fairly minor point, and it's more for my clarification, because either I read it wrong or something, but on red page 4 of 33, top paragraph, starting in the 5th line down, it says greater than in 2020 when the Yentna SEG was missed, but the OEG was attained. And I don't quite understand how that can happen, since the SEG was 13,000 as the bottom and the OEG is 16,000 as the bottom. How can you miss 13,000 but make 16,000? I'm wondering if that was a typo or what exactly that is.
Yeah, I'm not looking at it, Howard, but I think it must have been. The OEG is 3,000 fish. And, it's a pretty narrow goal anyway, but the OEG, is bumped up a little bit when the board established that. And I believe you're right. The low end of the SEG is 13,000. And we kind of came in between those two goals in 2020.
Thank you, Howard. Sam, we just did that to show you that we read this stuff, All right. Gotcha, buddy. Okay, items of business. So tonight, this is basically the meat of it tonight. We submitted a whole bunch of questions to the department, and we're going to start with question 1 and work down through them. Did the audience get the questions, Ted? Do they have them out there, or are they online?
Let me just clarify. So out on the table, there was, going left to right, there was an agenda. Then there was a packet, and the packet is the thicker of the 2 or the 3 materials, and it has red numbers. And the questions that the Fish and Wildlife Commission submitted with the answers Fish and Game returned is on red page 19. Red page 19. So you will see on that packet, prior to that red page 19, there was a sport fish summary for the 2021 season. And then there was a supplement about comfish, and that has blue page numbers. So the commercial fishing summary is on what we call a handout or supplement, and that's got blue numbers. But if you want to follow along with some of these questions that are being referenced that Fish and Wildlife Commission submitted to the department, they're on red page 19, starting on that page.
And they provided us with a bunch of good graphs and numbers and stuff, so everybody can see what they are. Okay, question 1. Jim, do you want to kick us off with question 1?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the answer for the EEZ waters and says the department has no plans to change openings beyond what is written in management plans and will react to fish abundance to focus fishery efforts in areas that are not in the EEZ when appropriate. And so my question is, the EEZ waters cover, as I remember, a lot of areas where the drift fleet used to fish. And it seems to me that there's going to be a migration into other areas where they haven't spent a lot of time previously fishing. And so I just wonder what the details of that are. It just seems like it's we've got it. Don't worry, be happy. And it just seems to me like there's going to be a huge change in what happens in the commercial fishery. So can you flesh out any details on why you don't think that you need to do anything different than what you've been doing in the past before this EEZ was closed?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wouldn't phrase it that way, that I don't think we shouldn't do something different. It's just right now, without knowing what's going to happen in season, we're not planning on changing any specifics of how things are done beyond the management plan. So for instance, some people have said, well, can't we fish up the drifters up in area 2 or something like that? But currently area 2 is not in any management plan, so that would be going outside of the plan. One thing we could do that is still in the plan would be to fish the sections, expanded sections more, because those are in state waters. So that's what I meant by staying in the plans. Right now, I mean, we might try, depending on fish numbers, and that's the main thing we're going to look at, is where the fish are and how many. And we will adapt to that as best as we can. But if, for instance, if area 1 is called for in a management plan, I will still open area 1, but it'll have an asterisk on it that says the federal government or the easy waters have been closed. So technically area 1's open, but all that entire area, you cannot fish there. So that's what we have planned for now. We haven't planned on going outside of any plans or doing anything like that, unless the Board of Fish were to instruct us to do so before the year that's coming up, or whenever this, whether it goes into effect or not. So that's what we meant by that. I could see how more expanded corridor openers might be possible if we had fish numbers that supported that. And it could lead to, for instance, opening area 1 more often, because the only part of area 1 that's going to be open is a small triangle up there in the kind of northeastern corner that's outside of the federal waters. But beyond that, I can't really speculate. We always react to fish numbers, and we'll do the best we can. There's a variety of things that might happen. You would expect, since we're not fishing down south much, there might be a kind of a time lag there. The first couple weeks of the drift fishery might not be very productive. And then later on, we might end up getting some fish up into that northwestern corner. But then all those areas and the sections are smaller, so the fish will move in and out of that very quickly. So it's going to be difficult. It's a tall order to try and stay within the management plan and confront any possibilities which might occur. And just also remember, one last thing, I'll stop after this. We haven't had some very big sockeye runs in several years now. So if we get an average or above average run, this whole scenario will be even harder. So, and I suppose last we could also, react with the set net fishery and open that more, but then that, that's subject to rules of the king salmon. So we'll react as best as we can within the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And go ahead, we'll start with Larry.
Well, Mr. Martin, I appreciate your comments on this question, but there certainly seems to be a lot of uncertainty at this point exactly how the commercial fisheries of Cook Inlet are going to be managed in the future. As you know, this commission has been very active in the last decade in modifying the management procedure in Cook Inlet. This EEZ issue is probably a major impact to the way management of that fishery has occurred in the last several decades. It has the potential to have a major impact on how this fishery is managed. And as you know, we're very concerned with any form of management change that may be advocated or supported because of the EEZ loss harvest areas, that we don't want to see a mixed stock fishery like we had a decade ago. We want to see the continuation and use of the expanded inshore Kenai, Kasilof, Anchor Point sections. Currently, right now, harvesting in Area 2 during the bulk of the commercial fishing season is closed. And only under circumstances of a huge run over 4.6 million can you get into that area, which has a major impact when it's fished in there on the salmon runs to this area. So I would hope that whatever approach you use and the justification that you use for changes recognizes that this fishery has been changed to reduce the next stocked harvest to a more discrete harvesting practices like we see in Bristol Bay, and don't use or receive pressure from other users to change this philosophy of management because of last harvest opportunity in the EEZ zone. I think it has a major potential on how we move ahead on the management of the Cook Inlet fishery. And that, of course, it had a strong influence on the stocks that we have here in Upper Cook Inlet and the Susitna, Matanuska drainages. But I guess in conclusion, I'll say that we'll, as a commission, will be very watchful on changes in the way we management, if there are changes based on the EEZ zone loss harvest opportunities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Larry. Howard, you had a question?
Yeah, maybe it's just me, I don't know, but the federal waters begin 3 miles offshore. 3 miles and in is state waters, 3 miles and out away from shore are federal waters. And I've just been sitting looking at a map of Cook Inlet, and it looks like the overwhelming majority of Cook Inlet has at least some federal water involved. And I believe the cutoff for the drift fleet, they can't come into the Northern District. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of wondering also where these guys are going to fish, because obviously they're going to demand their right to get to fish, or what they think is their right. And if you only got a 3 mile section on each shoreline, that's going to make it interesting between the set netters and the drift fleet for how they interact. And I guess this is more of a comment than a question. I'll just say that, Mr. Marston, I do not envy your job trying to manage those two groups.
Thank you, Howard.
Yeah,
go ahead, Brian.
I appreciate that. I would just encourage you to get a hold of an EEZ map, which you can, I think you could Google that, or if you want to drop me an email, I could send you one. But you're right, it's basically 3 miles, within 3 miles of shore is the state waters. But when you get to Ninilchik, it stops there, and there's a straight line from Ninilchik to Calgon Island. Everything south of that is the EEZ. So there is a little triangle of what used to be Area 1 that is in state waters. And then nothing north of that line is considered federal waters. That's just the definite of the EEZ, and that's what it's always been. It's based on several things. I think more or less because Calgon Island is there, you don't know, what 3 miles ashore do you go from. So they just drew the line from the south tip of Calgon down into Ninilchik. So there is a little bit of water there in Area 1, and also all the sections are actually in state water, other than a little chunk of the Kasilof expanded section. So both of those sections could potentially still be open. So there's a little more state waters than it looks like if you just look at the 3 mile definition. But the actual definition is, you should probably get a map and you'll see what I'm talking about when I say northwest corner and stuff like that. So.
Thank you, Brian. For those in the audience, or if you're looking at this packet on page 27, red 27, there's a rough map of Cook Inlet to better understand what we're talking about. And acronyms like EEZ and OTF and stuff like that, if you have any questions, let us know. Anyhow, Andy Couch, Commissioner Andy Couch had a question, and then Pete. So go ahead, Andy.
Yes, this is just asking for clarification from Brian. So what about the anchor point section? Is that cut down And then it sounded like you said the Kasilof section, part of it is going to be cut down with EEZ waters.
It's actually a very small part of the Kasilof expanded section is in EEZ water, so that really won't functionally change. A good chunk of the Anchor Point section is in EEZ water, so you're only going to be able to fish within 3 miles of shore throughout the entire Anchor Point section. So it does have quite a good impact, or a significant impact onto Anchor Point section, but not as much or not at all for the Kasilof section.
All right, thank you. Do you have any follow-up, Andy?
No, and I appreciate the answer there, Brian. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead and put your hand down. Go ahead, Pete.
Hey, Brian, this is Pete Probasco, and I don't envy your challenges next year in the fisheries, but I want to take you up on your offer, and if you would please send us pictures of the maps. I'm sure you had to develop them for the North Pacific Fishery Management Council on how those boundaries intertwine with the state waters, if you would, please.
Yes, I can do that. If you have access to that document that was made for the decision, it's on page 182. Around there, there's a section there, and they have a really good map. It's important to understand that the only map that exists is a federal NOAA map, and there are no hard waypoints for what it is. Unfortunately, it's a NOAA chart with the lines drawn on the NOAA chart, and that's the only definition that exists for EEZ. And so I can foresee some problems trying to express where the boundary is when these fisheries starts. But that's the reality of it right now.
Go ahead, Pete. Pete has a follow-up question.
Thanks, Brian. That's what I was expecting. My question then is, what is NOAA's or the federal next year in season going to do as far as enforcing those lines? Are they going to have an active participation or not?
I'm not aware what amount of enforcement will occur. I haven't heard.
Okay, thank you. Pete, you want to read number 2, and while you're on it, do you have that right in front of you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question number 2 was, what was the salmon harvest in Upper Cook Inlet Area 1 for the last 10 years, including 2021? And the department provided a table 1, very detailed with the harvests by species and by date. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for that table. Any questions to follow up on that from the commission?
My comment, Mike, was it was a very good summary. It provided the information that I was looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. It's good to see it all laid out like that. Okay, hearing no more questions on that, or from the audience. Anybody out there got a, all right. We'll move on to question 3. What was the daily participation and harvest for the Susitna River PU fishery during the 2020 and 2021 season? This is basically a new fishery for the public in the Mat-Su, and which is pretty darn remote. It's you pretty much leave from Deshka Landing and take your boat all the way down past the mouth of the Yentna River, and just past Old Susitna Station is where this new PU fishery begins. That's quite a long boat ride down there, and usually you don't see many boats down past the mouth of the Yentna River anyhow, but the last 2 years has been a personal use fishery, and so we've asked the department to shed some light on that in terms of number of days and harvest. So Sam, is it you that would give us some ideas about how that's going? Or Andy, who's participated?
Either one.
Go ahead, Sam.
Okay, well, I can start. The board started this off real conservative because there are a lot of questions out there about runs in general up the Susitna. We have some abundance estimates for sockeye, and coho and chum over the years for various reasons. We've conducted those estimates, but it's just Saturdays and Wednesdays from July 10th to the end of the month. And with each successive period, it gets a little better because run timing wise, sockeye and coho up the Susitna, it only grows as you move through the month of July. And I think that's what the dip netters are kind of finding is fairly low participation. You can see the 2020 data. We don't have 2021 yet. I haven't seen it. So when that comes out from Adam St. Savior, we can certainly make that available. I think maybe it's probably similar. The folks that are going down there and having a good time doing it, and they're starting to figure out how to fish because there's a lot of snags in the river down there. So it can be difficult with a dip net, but the current isn't real fast. And so a lot of times you can get on a snag and you can get your net back off as long as you're paying attention. And then also dipping from shore. And what we're finding is some pilots are flying into one of the sandbars down there and bringing a dip net, and they're participating, flying in with airplane on at least one of the sandbars down there. So it's just kind of a new fishery. It's just kind of just taken off.
All right, Sam, go ahead, Larry.
Question for Sam. We asked for the daily participation and harvest for this fishery, and it's not shown here in the material we have before us. We get a kind of a seasonal summary, if you will. Is there a reason we didn't get the daily harvest to see what the participation, has it changed through the course of the fishery, and what species might have been more abundant at the beginning and less abundant at the end, some of those kind of issues?
Yeah, I could only provide the 2020 data, which should be up there as far as harvest by species. It was 2,300 sockeye and a little over 500 coho, 750 pinks, and then some chums in there as well. There were 6 days open in 2020. And as far as days fished by the folks that went down there, it was a little shy of 400 days fished total.
Okay, Sam, and it looks like Andy Couch has a question.
Yeah, Sam, Andy Couch here, going back to that last question and what Larry just asked, and I didn't write this question, but I'm sure curious on it, from your discussion. So we've heard from you that through the season, the catches go up, but what the question was asking for, I believe, was on this first date of the season, what was caught? How many permits fished? What was caught? On the second day, same thing for all 6 days. Could we maybe get that from you guys?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I didn't get that out of the question. But I think that we can get that. I don't think I've seen that, but I could ask the question, sure. So you can kind of see how that changes. Tim, that should be available, right?
Yeah, it is. It'll be a little different in that we don't get all permits, returned. And so we estimate the total. But what we present usually in the reports is I think we just, like Sam said, guys, I think we just missed that as part of the question. But what we get is what's reported is harvest for each of those days for people that return their permit.
Thanks, Tim. Did you have any more to say on that? Looked like your hand had been up. Okay. Any other questions? I have one quick one. I didn't think you were supposed to harvest Chinook in that fishery. It looks like you got 22. What do you do with those?
Well, those were reported, so they go into the reporting, but you're right, yeah, those are, Chinook salmon are supposed to be returned to the water unharmed. You know, you're getting late in the season, granted after July 10th. And of course, there's still gonna be a few kings around, so.
We should have a donation box to the senior center at Deshka Landing, maybe. I know, just kidding. All right, we'll move on to question 4 here. Oh, Trevor, sorry, dude. Sorry, man. Go ahead. Speak up.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I had the same question about king salmon, and it just raises a question of enforcement. Is there any enforcement? And it's interesting that you may or may not have to return your tags. Is there any way, like with hunting licenses, that it's done online, and if you don't report at the end of the year, you get an email that says you need to report before you can get another tag? Or I don't know. It just seems to me that the lack of reporting is an issue, and the fact that 22 kings were harvested, and I don't know if even a hand got slapped. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, hi Trevor. I believe we have that system in play now as far as, returning personal use permits, or not offering them in the next year. So there is a reporting requirement, and it gets pretty good enforcement down that way. It is a little more remote, but we do have troopers that operate by helicopter, and we also that go down there by boat. Maybe not every period, but being that it's a new fishery, we ask them to go down there and do enforcement. So they go down and they talk to folks. Like anything, of course, they've been short-staffed for a number of years now. So it's you always would like it to be a little bit more. I would.
Thanks, Sam. Sorry if I came off a little accusatory, just trying to gather some information.
Yeah.
Thank you, Trevor. Okay, we got another question here from Jim Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to commend the Department of Fish and Game for implementing this. I know you had to because the board ordered you to, but I hope that you will consider expanding it if the numbers support it. I did fish the fishery, and I didn't report any kings. We didn't catch any either. But I think if it's expanded, it may get some more use. And I saw maybe 3 planes. A couple were on gravel bars and one was on a beach. So it was pilots were getting in there.
Thank you, Jim. We got another question from Andy.
Yeah, this is just clarification for Trevor concerning the presence of enforcement. So I took people down there 3 days this past year, and I was definitely seeing helicopters flying. I don't know, how they would make a determination what's illegal, what's legal from something like that, but I was definitely seeing that. And I've been down to that part of the river many times, and I've never seen helicopters kind of hovering around the river like that. So my thought at the time was that must be enforcement. And then just to give you another idea there, during the sport fishing season, I saw troopers at some of the locations very occasionally. And this year, my boat was not checked at all for licenses or anything.
All right. Thank you, Andy. Okay, we're going to move on to question 4. Larry's going to read that.
Question. Question 4, for the past several years, more than half of the Lake Kenai Sockeye Run has entered the river in August. Would ADF&G support extending the Kenai River personal use fishery and providing fishing opportunities for east side set netters using reduced gear to address late run timing?
Tim, I think that's towards you. It says you didn't plan to open the east side set net fishery beyond the season closing date of 8/15. That's written in the management plan. Any other thoughts on what might be able to happen? Oh, sorry. Brian, did I say Tim?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well,
Sorry,
yeah,
buddy.
This is Brian, for the east side set net, we have that hard closing date on the 15th, and I've ventured out past that date once and that didn't go too well. So I don't think there's any plans to go outside of that August 15th or the east side set net fishery with the numbers we've seen so far. Who knows what'll happen if we keep getting later and later. Something might have to happen if we're going to catch those sockeye. And I don't know what the plans are for the personal use fishery. I could let Sportfish talk. I don't think Matt ever came on, but generally they don't like to extend past their typical close date for that either. So.
Okay, we have a follow-up from Larry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a question that only has got a response to half of the question. This questions both the Kenai personal use fishery, which there's no response, and the east side set net fishery. What is the department's position on extending the personal use fishery in the Kenai River? And I think one of the reasons this came up as a question is because last year we had a very large Kenai sockeye run that exceeded the escapement goal by a substantial margin. And the department provided additional opportunities to harvest fish in the sport fishery, but the east side or the Kenai River personal use fishery, which catches enormous numbers of sockeye, was not extended. It closed when over half the run had not even showed up yet. So is there a response to how you would deal with the Kenai personal use fishery in view of the fact that the run comes in much later in the last several years, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Larry, this is Tim McKinley. I don't see Med on there, so I'll stick my neck out and take a shot at that. Yeah, to my recollection, the only time that the department has extended the PU fishery, I think was 2005 or 2006, 2006, I think. And it was kind of a incredibly late sockeye run. All the fisheries, all the in-river sockeye fisheries had been closed and a lot of closures, the commercial fishing in the inlet, a very unusual year. It was extended just a few days. But the short answer, as far as like in the near future, I'm not aware of any real stipulations in the management plans for extending it. There's in so much as there's people like yourself and probably others that would be interested in that in season. We get a lot of pushback from other users like coho fishermen within the Kenai River and other types of fisheries. It's not a slam dunk, so to speak. So if I was going to sum it up, it would probably take some kind of board action that was written in a management plan where there's more direct stipulations for how and when it would be open.
Larry has a follow-up.
Quick follow-up to that. The management plans are not precise in terms of whether you can open, close, or do things. The commissioner has the authority to react to a given situation, such as a huge over-escapement outside the provisions of a management plan. So I don't think the management plan is necessarily an excuse for not extending the east side set net fishery or providing different form of gear or not providing the personal use fishing opportunity when you got a huge excessive run. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Larry. A hand. Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, so Matt is actually on here, but he couldn't get in through the usual route, but he's on his phone that ends with 7428. Matt Miller.
Matt, would you like to speak?
Yeah, Mike, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Matt.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was having some issue getting on Teams, so I was just listening to the audio.
You can always just interrupt manually.
Okay. I'll try that after this. So just to follow up a little bit, it's a question we often get asked about the personal use fishery on the Kenai and extending that. And it's problematic, as Tim had mentioned. We have done it before and have probably the authority to do it. Well, we've done it before, so we do. But a couple issues come up. One is that then you start getting into coho, and people can release the coho, but it starts interfering with coho fishery and passage of fish up through there. The other issue is that one of the partners, of course, with that, one of the big players is the city of Kenai itself. And they have contracts that go through July for cleaning up the beaches and for security and for doing the camping and for doing the ticket booths. You know, all the contracts that they do run through July. And so when we have extended that into August, it really was an issue with the city. So while they're right, we do have the authority to do it. It gets problematic. And really, if it was something that folks wanted to see, it's probably best addressed by just putting in the books as a board proposal and having it in regulation that way so that we're not doing anything extraordinary, but trying to do it by emergency order.
Okay. Go ahead, Pete.
Thanks, Matt. Pete Probasco here. So if I understand you correctly, you currently do have the authority through emergency order, but it's outside of normal fishery management practices that I guess prevent you from opening it in August, i.e. the city of Kenai and that?
Hi, Pete. Yeah, I guess we do have the authority. I mean, we've done it before, but it steps outside of any plan that we have. So if we're stepping outside of the plan, we really need to have extraordinary circumstances and justification in order to do it. And we just haven't seen it. We didn't see that last year. I'd have to go back. I don't remember when we were making or exceeding the goal last year. The other issue that we've had with that, and I'd forgotten about this, but is with the permits. So people start returning permits after they go fishing. And if we extend it into August, then someone could say, well, looks like there's a late tail to this run. I'm going to go fishing again. Then we have an issue with how do we reissue the permit that they had and make sure that their harvest isn't getting counted twice. So the short answer is, yes, we have the authority to do it, but it's problematic to do it by emergency order.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I just remind folks that we're an hour and 15 minutes into it. We're just getting on to question 5 and we have 16 questions. So if you're not just dying to have your question asked, maybe we can do it at another time because we'd like to leave time for the public to have a question answered. So anyhow, that being said, Howard, would you read question 5?
Yeah, this is Howard. This has been touched on in the past, but to my knowledge has never received an itemized list of criteria. And that's what I would like to know is what this itemized list might be. And that would be what specific criteria would the department require to be met in order to raise the daily coho bag limit to 3 fish from the current 2? In my understanding was a little over 30 years ago, it was 3 fish. Things were going well in the valley. Then the coho populations hit some years of below average returns. And the board instituted the change from 3 fish to 2 fish. I'm speculating, I suspect at the department's request, because it's easier to EO an increase than it is to EO a decrease in a bag limit that's in regulation. And in that 30 years, the bag limit's never been increased back to 3 fish on a regular basis. And I was just curious what criteria the department would like to see met before they would consider EOing or getting the board to institute a regulation that would require the raise. Obviously, we're talking a strong run of fish. How strong does it have to be? We're talking about potentially identifying these runs through weir counts, probably high weir counts. How high would they have to be before the department would consider upping the bag limit?
Sam, you want to jump on that or?
Sure. Be happy to. We went through, back when I was first getting started with the department in the mid-90s, we went through a few years, 97, 99, maybe 98, even kind of jump out at me a little bit. Some pretty low runs that prompted a special meeting out of cycle that met in the winter of 2000, and they put a lot of those 2 fish bag limits in place. And then wouldn't you know it, 2000 was one of the best coho runs, just came right back because they're a boom bust kind of a species. And since that time, there have been some changes back to 3 in some areas depending on where you're looking. You know, for instance, Talkeetna was one of the more recent changes back. You're kind of mixing up in season and what's in regulation. I mean, we have authority to increase a bag limit in season, say, if there's an escapement goal in place, then we can project that we're going to exceed that escapement goal. And then if the increase in harvest as a result of that increase isn't going to drop us down below the lower bound of a goal, which typically doesn't happen because most of these goals are pretty wide and harvest just isn't going to be that much when you make a change in season. So we do that quite a bit on these really boom years. And then we also restrict on some other years. But in general, where we're at right now is some of the more high exploitation fisheries like the Little Sioux, and also even on Jim Creek. You know, we've decided we've actually added another restriction to Jim Creek with taking a day out of the fishing, you know, at a certain point during the coho run. So, you know, it's probably good right now for some of those systems to stay at 2. We've also, you know, and those are some of the more high exploitation. Some of the smaller stocks that are boatside have kind of stayed 2, and they have a long history of being 2 fish. But yeah, it can happen, and it has happened. And I think every board cycle, we can look at those numbers again and look at how well some of these fisheries have met their escapement goals, or even the surrounding streams that don't have an escapement goal, but yet are set conservatively. And one thing we like to do a lot of times is when there's a group of streams together that share similar properties, we tend to like to manage them together as a unit as well. And you know, enforcement wise, just predictability and regulations, having the common angler be able to understand the regulations where they're not all different on every single stream is also kind of an important consideration. Those are some of the criteria. I don't know that I've ever seen it written down, but those are the things that we go through when we evaluate, escapements, harvests, exploitation rates, if we can get them, if we have a weir in place, and that type of things we can track. We're also looking at the statewide harvest survey. What are the trends that we're seeing? Has harvest stabilized? We've looked at the cusset tan for a number of years because there's always reports that fishing was too heavy on the cusset tan, but yet every time we look at the numbers for the cusset tan, they're a fairly stable harvest rate across the years. And so there's not really any reason for a change there. So just kind of some examples I thought of.
All right, Sam, thank you. Any more questions on that? Okay, we're gonna go to 6. If Jim, you would ask that question, and then, let's keep cruising through.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Sykes. The question is, please provide us a better understanding of the department's fishery management funding priorities for 2022 and in future years, providing short-term priorities and long-term priorities. I was glad to see that you're planning to install sonar on Lower Lake Creek to enumerate king salmon and also improve salmon genetic stock assessments, which in a host of things that you mentioned there, I'm really pleased about that. If you're able to use sonar on Lower Lake Creek, would it help your short-term management objectives to restore or even get some new technology for like the Susitna River or some of the other things? We depend on these weirs, and you can make a decision, it seems like, in season, but it's not on the same kind of daily or hourly basis that there is over on the east side. And so I wonder, with all that's going on with the EEZ zone and the recognition that sonar may be useful, can we get some of these new digital and electronic things on some of our other streams to make better short-term decisions?
Yeah. Mike, you want me to go ahead?
Please do, Sam.
Yes. Thanks, Jim, for that question. Yeah, I mean, that when you look at king salmon productivity across the area, that one at Lake Creek is a very important one. We have a very good, a big data set now on Deshka River because we've had a weir there since '95. We've returned the weir to the little Susitna River, so we're gathering more information on those fish since 2013. And Lake Creek's always been one that I've wanted to have a project on. There's a tremendous guide industry of 60 plus guides. There's probably at least a half dozen lodges up there. It's really big, and it's really big on non-residents' use of that area. So it's a little different than other areas in the valley up there. Will the sonar be a long-term there? If it becomes that way, eventually we can use it as a management tool for in-season management, like you're saying. That'll take some time. But right now, what we need is a little bit more data from the Yentna stock. It's one of the 4 Susitna Basin stocks that we manage. And if we make that data set more robust by gathering data that's specific to Yentna, and Lake Creek's a good place to go because it gets most of the king salmon on the Yentna, as far as, and the fishery's big, but really it's the escapements there. So that's the idea. We also want to get some age, sex, length data off of Yentna fish, and we'll be doing that by fish wheel. And so this will be year 1 of that. We're pretty excited. It's kind of a bold move for us, especially during this time of budget cuts, but it's got, long-term implications because, there may be a future refinement of that escapement goal up there due to data that we gather now. and things like that that'll help us manage that stock. Nick Djokovic is on here now, and I don't know, Nick, if I did all that justice, but he's our researcher and he's the mastermind behind going to Lake Creek.
Hi, Nick, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I think Sam hit it. Like he said, it would be nice to have an in-season tool there, but, to get some of the things we're looking at right now is, when to run the sonar, what's the start and end date of it? Because what is the run timing of Chinook? At that spot in the river, it's just like a mile or so above Chitna Lake. We don't have a lot to go on, we've been talking to a few guides, and so it's going to be a while before I think it's useful for management. But in the short term, that data, like Sam said, we've got the Yetna as one of the stocks that we model the escapement for. And it's a big system, and we're the lightest on data on the Yetna. So since we went to the new stock-based goals a couple of years ago, we know that we have needed to gather more data on the Yetna. So if any of you are familiar with our fish wheel tagging project that we do on the main stem Susitna River, that uses fish wheels and also the Deshka weir, we're basically shifting our effort starting next summer to the Yetna, and we'll be doing a little bit of radio telemetry and recovering those and hoping to detect those tags going into Lake Creek. So we'll be tagging fish with, at Yetna River Mile 6, and in combination with the sonar, we hope gives us good data for our model, like Sam said.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, both.
All right. Thank you. Oop, I see a hand up. There's a hand up out there. Andy, go ahead.
Yes, this is concerning the statement there that returning a weir to Shalatna Lake, which is where Lake Creek comes from, for sockeye management was a priority of the commercial division. And, the question was about 2022. Brian, do you have any timeline on when we might get a weir back at Shalatna Lake?
No, unfortunately, I don't. It's just something that I really want back. And I've always, when people ask me, what do you want to spend money on? That's it. So. But I don't have any real idea when that money might materialize or not.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
I'll just mention it. I got a question about that, or maybe a statement that we're looking at Judd Lake at the headwaters of the Talachilitna for sockeye. We're looking at Larson Lake at the headwaters of the Talkeetna River. We used to look at Shalatna Lake at the headwaters of Lake Creek, and then having a weir in the Little Susitna. All have been major king salmon rivers as well, and all have been our recreational rivers. Coincidentally, it seems like having that information on these rivers, continuing to have that information, is really important. And I'd really encourage the Shalatna weir to go back in, as the state has more money now rather than less. I think that Shalatna weir is a priority. I think the weirs that we have in Deshka River is also a rec river, is super important for kings and especially coho. So if it was left in longer, that would be great. But ultimately, it just comes down to numbers. And if we don't have those numbers, then we're just left scratching our head on what's happening in these river systems. And I understand how important these aerial counts are, these flyovers, but they pale in comparison, I think, to actually having these weirs in place. And especially for sockeye now on the Susitna and Yetna watershed, since we've liberalized the fishing and there does appear to be more fish coming into the Northern District. So anyhow, that's more my statement. But if there's any money out there to scratch the surface to get Shalatna back in, I'm all for it. All right. Question 7. Kendra, would you like to do that one?
Yes, the question is, please discuss Fish and Game's position and concerns on in-stream flow in June, July, and August as it relates to meeting salmon conservation goals. And the answer that was provided had some really good information on the effects of flow on fish, which really emphasizes the need for flow to be there for fish. There's wording in here that adult salmon migration came to a halt on the Deshka when temperatures started to exceed above 20 degrees Celsius. And in 2 years, there were adult die-offs in streams because of high temperatures, 2015 and 2019. So I think a lot of us know the impacts of these high temperatures, which are related often to low flows. I think part of what the question wanted to get at is, are you seeing any trends in flows becoming low more often in the summer? And related to that, my understanding is that Fish and Game has several applications for in-stream flow permits. And do you have any comment on how to get those processed more quickly so that flow can be reserved and those permits can be held by Fish and Game to ensure there's flow for fish? Thank you.
I'm not sure who would.
I can take a stab at it.
Okay, Sam.
You know, I prepared the answer for this question kind of from the perspective of an area management biologist. We do have others in our department and our water shop that work on in-stream flow reservations, and those are, you know, I don't understand the entire process. I'm involved with it though, at some point, by providing those folks information about the fisheries and my observations as an area biologist. So those are ongoing. Like I said, I don't know the exact process or like the average time that it takes one of those to go through. As far as trends, you know, I don't know. I mean, I know what it does to fish, and I've seen it over the years. I mean, you know, I've been involved with management since about 2000. And I've worked in this area for a long time. So I've been involved with management for over 20 years here in some capacity. And yeah, we've seen some years that stand out from the others. 2004 was a big coho year, but it was a very low water year. And it was one of the first years as an assistant that I was running that project that, you know, I took note of that, of how that could affect migration of coho salmon up the river. And we've seen it happen in some other years. And we saw it happen on one year with king salmon in 2013. That's the only year I've known that it's happened for king salmon in 13. You throw in a drought year like 2019 that just wiped everything off the charts, and then you're like left one, you look at that and you say, gosh, I don't ever want to see that happen again. So hopefully we won't. But you know, I don't know. There's been a few years. I took note of a couple here, 2015 and 19. In recent years that I've noticed. On the flip side of that, when we get hit by a big flood, 100-year flood like we saw in 2006, and then turned around and had a 200-year flood hit in 2012, that does a lot of scouring out there too. So that always kind of raises your eyebrows a little bit and leaves you wondering, okay, what effect might that have on salmon production, you know, when it hits the system? But I'm afraid I can't really answer your question about it. Do I think I've seen more of that happen in recent years? I don't know. It just every few years it seems like there's either flooding or some high water temperatures that cause us to pay attention. Sometimes that's across the area. Sometimes it's localized at Larson Creek or somewhere, you know. So Yeah.
Okay, Sam, thank you. Brian, you got your hand up? You want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up a little bit on what Sam said. We do have, he mentioned there's a whole group, a kind of office within the department that deals with those. So we could provide those people as far as answering your question about how to expedite the process or whatnot. It's really not in either mine or Sam's, purview to do that, but we do provide information on it. But there are some people, we can provide those names to you if you want to really dig into the process, and we will do that.
Thanks, Brian. Howard has a question.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. We had a presentation to the commission from the person within the Department of Natural Resources that does reviews on water rights reservations. And they were reviewing Willow Creek at the time. And she explained to us that while there was no requested use of the water, they by law have to review this stuff, I guess, every 10 years. So they were looking at it. And the recommendation was made that the Department of Fish and Game supported, according to her, to give up about 50 CFS of water during the months, I believe it was June and July, or it was July and August, 2 months in the summer, to give up an amount of water that was reserved. And she claimed that there was no economic value with this water, which we took great exception to when you look at the value of sport fishing, and those waters support the fish populations. I guess the short version of my question is, why would the department consider giving up water rights on an area that's already protected when there's no request from any other source to use that water?
If you guys can't answer that, we'll just we keep asking the question. So at any rate, we're paying attention. All right. So what I'm going to do, you want them to try to follow up with that more a little, Howard? That's a big one.
Well, I'd be curious to hear who made the decision or what group. I don't think probably an individual. And then I'd be curious what type of information the department is giving to DNR for doing these water rights investigations when DNR is telling us there's no economic value to the water. So it's no big deal to give it up. We obviously disagreed. And then as kind of an aside, I was contacted by a retired member of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal people, saying that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has literally hundreds of water reservation requests into DNR since back in the mid-90s that are not being acted on or reviewed because they've only got maybe 1 or 2 people doing these current reviews, which apparently mandatorily have to be done every 10 years. And so there was some concern about when are these hundreds of other requests for review going to happen. I'd just be curious on what's going on there, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, you've been put on notice. All right, I'm jumping around here a little bit, so you guys better stick with me here. I want to go to question 14.